In a world riddled with fat phobia, food and body shaming, and an ever shifting idea of health and wellness, the idea of raising food neutral and body connected children can feel like it's the most insurmountable of tasks, leading many of us to wonder, is this even possible? Hi everyone, how's it going? I'm Kira Wackett. Thanks for joining me for another video as we work to empower and equip you with the confidence and skills to write your own story so that you can live a life on purpose. Today we're talking about how to raise your children with a sense of food neutrality and body connectivity. What do I mean by this? I mean the idea of seeing food as energy or fuel that's not polarized by labels such as good or bad, and as such laden with shame or celebration. I mean raising children with a focus on body positivity and ideally existing in a world where they can celebrate theirs and every other body for its unique presentation and experience in the world. But at the core, and more importantly, I'm talking about raising children who can connect to and listen to their bodies. People who view their bodies not as something to be controlled by the rules of the diet industry, but who listen to their bodies, not only as it relates to hunger and fullness, but with regards to all other cues that it may send. We all want to raise our kids to live the best lives they can. We want them to be safe, happy, healthy, and this is especially true when we talk about bodies and food. As a licensed therapist specializing in eating disorders and anxiety, much of my work has been to support patients and their families in navigating the world of food neutrality and body positivity, which can feel like an impossible task. Bombarded with marketing messages that promote thin body ideals, dieting, weight loss, and trends in healthy eating, layered with the internalized shame we carry as caregivers to get it right, many of us are overwhelmed. Add to that our own dysfunctional relationship with food and our bodies, which introduces bias into each of these areas, and it can feel like a game that we just can't win. Are they eating too much, too little? If I talk to them about what they're eating, am I shaming them or helping them? When do I intervene? Should I talk to them about their body or appearance, even if it's good? Do we talk about weight? At what age? Is there weight a concern? The biggest thing I tell parents and caregivers is that there's no right answer. We're all going to screw up and screw up every day. I specialize this, and I still say things that I look back on and realize are rooted in internal biases of diet culture, fat phobia, and so many of the other isms that plague us today. That being said, let's go over some of the ideas and principles that we can all use to work towards that same goal, raising the next generation to see food neutrally and to feel connected to and show their body love, rather than spend their whole lives hating it. Before we get started, I will say this throughout, but want to make sure that we put it here as well. There are always circumstances that will make these ideas difficult to put into practice or being experienced as realities and identities to consider. I don't want to dismiss or take away from any of that. Instead, I want you to see these ideas as your guidepost and do what you can. Show yourself grace and work with what you have, and if there are ways I can expand the way I talk about this or support you in a more direct way, let me know. Now, as we think about this, the first thing we have to do in this process is to get clear on our story. What stories do you have about your own body? Food. What messages and experiences did you have growing up? What was modeled to you? I grew up surrounded by family members with poor relationships with food and their bodies, using food to cope, constantly dieting, hoarding food, and body shaming. My weight and appearance were talked about frequently, not only with them, but with peers as well. These messages and deeply embedded shame systems left me feeling like my body was a problem. I spent years battling a severe eating disorder and worked actively every day to maintain recovery. This dramatically changes the way I view food, consciously and subconsciously. Knowing this helps me show up with greater awareness and intention with my daughter, Everly. Now we need to think about what was taught to you by your parents and caregivers. What messages did you get from your peers? How are people in different bodies treated? What connection did this have to other aspects of your identity? And as you work through this and get clear on your story, we need to think about how we can begin to model a different approach. So first off, we need to model body positivity honestly. Every time you pinch a part of your body or make negative comments about your appearance, your kids absorb it. Your self-loathing can become the basis for their own. And it's important not to shame yourself for doing this, but instead give yourself grace and compassion and consider what shifts you can make to show up differently. That doesn't mean to pretend that your relationship with your body is a daily dose of unicorns and rainbows. Pretending is not healing and only perpetuates silent suffering. Instead, focus on creating awareness around when you feel uncomfortable in your body and talk about it. Even with my 2-year-old, I tell her if I'm having a bad body image day and I normalize it. I tell her that it can make it hard to feel like I can show up in the world in the same way and that I'm working on trusting that I'm worthy of showing up fully every day, no matter how I feel about my body or how it looks. You can also talk to them about the impact of internalized biases and messages in our culture. Talk to them about the perpetuation of isms and introduce the concepts of fat phobia in age-appropriate ways. Let them know our world is founded on the belief that thinness is superior and that this is tied to race, gender identity and expression, and more. Now, even deeper as you think about this modeling, let's consider how it extends to food. Again, go back to this idea of rules and beliefs that you have about food and what you were taught. What shame do you carry about what you eat? What priority have you given food in your daily life? Again, the goal here isn't to pretend you feel great about food and everything's wonderful. The goal is to be honest. For example, my mother-in-law struggles a lot with eating vegetables. She had a lot of negative experiences with food growing up, which is something she still struggles with. Now, she spends a lot of time with Everly, and she makes an effort every day to eat vegetables with her. But she talks to her about how this is something she works at. She shares with her what vegetables do for the body and why they're great fuel sources, but's honest with her about her experience with them. So whatever struggles come up for you, it's okay to share them with your kids. You don't have to hide them to enforce that positivity and connection. Reinforce to your kids that every day is not picture perfect with food. Some meals you'll have in the car. Sometimes the day is going to get away from you and you order takeout instead. Show them what it means to find balance in this and that it's okay when the plans around food change. This brings us to the next principle. Let go of the binary around foods. Shift from good and bad foods to all foods fit. We've been inundated with food binaries our whole lives. Foods are labeled as good or bad, healthy or unhealthy. This binary system places a moral value or hierarchy on food and can lead to shame if we eat foods low on the ladder or send messages that foods are dangerous or scary. In some cases, this may lead them to eat these foods in secret and can lead to shame-based eating patterns as well. There is nutritional value in much of the foods we label as bad or treats. Even a lollipop has carbohydrates. I know this feels tricky, and no, I'm not saying that every time Everly wants cake for breakfast, I give it to her. Instead, talk about the role different foods play and what it looks like to fuel your body. How do the pieces of food fit together in the picture? For those of you with littles, Sesame Street does a great job with this for parents. It talks a lot about sometimes foods, or what it looks like to fuel the body, and the idea that there are some foods we don't eat as often because they don't give us as broad a range of nutrients and energy as others. Now, as you make this pivot, be mindful of using food as a reward or punishment as well. Comments like, if you do X, then you can have a cookie, or if you don't eat your dinner, then you can't have any dessert, connects foods to experiences and emotions. If they do X, then they earned or deserved this food. If they feel angry, sad, or do something wrong, they don't deserve it. It also becomes a way of food scaling, where foods are treats or chores. If we train them to see eating vegetables as a chore that then earns them a reward, such as a cookie, they're not actually building a relationship with the vegetables, but are ridding themselves of the obstacle to get to the cookie. Shifting away from this is another way to eradicate the good and bad food systems. With this, there are some ideas and beliefs we've been taught about food that don't serve us, and honestly probably never did. One of the biggest is the notion that they have to finish their plate. Now, I'm betting that you were told to finish your plate growing up. The comment I was most familiar with was, think about the starving kids in whatever country. It was a way to shame me into eating that ultimately did nothing to help kids without proper access to food. Instead, it focused my eating on satisfying someone else's idea of enough without identifying this for myself. This may show up in your household with comments like, "Let's take a few more bites before we get down from the table." But kids are inherently intuitive eaters. Think back to infancy. Our job is to help expand upon that intuition and connect more with what hunger and fullness look like for them. When we tell them to eat more or to stop, we can erode those cues. Instead of telling them what to eat, focus on encouraging them to think about how their belly feels when they eat. Explain what hunger and fullness mean and remember that ebbs and flows with food are normal. There are a few caveats with this I do want to mention before we keep going here, though. So first is that there is a difference between distracted eating and helping them focus on their meal versus pushing them to eat X amount. We've all had to help our kids get focused, especially when they're more stimulated or in those high energy situations. For us, for example, if we're eating outside of the home, we know it's going to be more of a grazing day, as it's a lot harder for Everly to focus on her meal with so much happening around her and the setting just being different. Instead of pushing that on her, we just plan our snacks to be more substantial to help her with that. Second thing is that there are some instances when this is vital, meaning when the pushing of your kids to eat is vital to supporting kids in getting adequate nutrition, including kids who may struggle with disordered eating or a diagnosed eating disorder. As a therapist in this field, I want to make sure that we never make blanket statements about anything, as we're all doing the best we can to support our children, and circumstances and context must be factored into play. In this case, it's that the majority of children don't require those levels of supervision. And in many cases, we can be doing this based on our own preconceived notions about what they should be eating versus what they need at a given time. But if you are concerned about how much your child is or isn't needing, my rule of thumb is to focus on trends, not one-off circumstances, and follow up with your providers if you're concerned. Now, aligned with this idea of letting go of the binaries and that idea of finishing our plate is to embrace the idea that enough is variable, and there's no such thing as a good or bad eater. Similar to the ideas of good and bad food, we often polarize children by talking about them as being such a good eater or a picky eater. This is usually more of a note when it comes to giving what seems like positive feedback, but it often can present itself in comments like, "Oh, she's an eater," or, "Oh, you must be really hungry." There's a suggestion in these contexts that there's a right or better way to eat or amount to have. Again, in some instances, you may be in a position you have to have more direct conversations with kids and young adults about these ideas, but in ways that are therapeutic and supportive of treatment or recovery. Going back to this idea of intuitive eating and body connection, explore the idea with your children about what satisfied feels like to them. Talk about how you know. Share with them or learn together why eating slower can be helpful in the learning spectrum of hunger and fullness. We like to ask Everly to check in with her belly about what she may need or want to feel satiated, or like she has enough energy to do the things her body wants and needs to do to grow and have fun. Similarly, we talk about our own experiences, eating too little or too much for what our bellies needed, and what that learning can feel like. When she communicates with us she's done, we can then say something to the effect of, "It's a great skill to know to listen to your belly or to your body." Next, when possible, prioritize eating together. Now, a lot of that is being alluded to by thinking about the way that we're communicating, but I really want to say it plainly. Many of these skills and conversations require you to have face time with your kids when they're eating, and studies have shown that eating meals together is a protective factor against developing negative relationships and patterns with food. It also allows your whole family the ability to reset and focus on priorities and connection. Whenever possible, sit down at the table, distraction-free, and enjoy a meal or snack together. Tell your children what it means to be with them. Whether they're 2 or 16, it's important they hear it. You can say something like, "I really enjoy having mealtime together and getting to spend time with you, especially when days feel so busy." One thing to consider in this is your own pressure to be doing and hyper-connected or multitasking in any given moment. When it's mealtime in our house, there are no phones, our Apple Watches are on silent, there are no distractions at the table. We're there as a family, focusing on conversation, or honestly, and sometimes just being there together in silence and being with our food. We all stay at the table until the last person is finished, the only caveat to leaving the table being if someone has to go to the bathroom during a meal or is getting more food. There are, of course, extenuating circumstances that may prompt some of these norms to be shifted at times, such as when my grandma was in the hospital and phones were at the table while we waited for a call from her doctor, or when Everly was having a terribly difficult day and our table centerpiece was her stuffed animals, who she wanted to eat with her while she was sick. I sincerely hope you take from this video that nothing is a hard and fast rule, but that we're looking to establish principles and norms to limit disordered and harmful relationships with food in our bodies. So when circumstances change, allow for that. Give grace. We're all still humans, and we're going to have days where things look different or we screw up in some way. Now, when it comes to food, it's also important to involve your kids in the food decisions. Have them help you with meal planning. Bring them to the grocery store, the farmers markets. They can help make the food too. Everly gets so excited to be my sous chef and loves telling people what she does when she cooks. Make it fun and get them excited to immerse themselves in food. If you have littles, look to some of the Montessori approaches to get them involved in the kitchen, such as washing veggies or getting a toddler knife to help cut apples or bananas. As they get older, involve them in the planning. Get them involved in prep and idea generation. On special occasions, let them pick where you order food from or talk about new restaurants and cultural experiences that they want to have. A major thing to consider for yourself is how you view the food prep. If it's something that causes you distress or that you view as a hassle, they're going to pick up on this. So try to see it as something to celebrate, even when it feels like the farthest thing from it. Express gratitude that you can be engaged in making the food that you're eating and take care of your body. Talk about food as fuel and how we get to prepare that fuel. Now from here, I want to shift gears a bit to talk about some of the harder pivots we need to make as it pertains to body image and connection. So thinking about this, the first thing I want us to consider is how to talk about appearance in neutral ways and eliminate conversations about weight and size from the topic list. We have to be careful with both ends of the spectrum, praise and judgment. Commenting on someone's weight or physical attributes creates a hyperfixation on their appearance. This may lead to them taking measures, sometimes extreme, to change or maintain it. Can you find neutral ways to celebrate your children's body for what it does for them or how hard they work in using it? Be especially mindful of well-intentioned, albeit ignorant comments from people outside of the home who may remark on your child openly with comments about how skinny or chunky they are, what they're eating, etc. This even shows up in the way we comment on how much or little hair a toddler has, with a subtle undertone being there is a right or expected amount of hair to have by the time you're 2. Be your child's advocate here, and an advocate for the global change we want to see where we stop making appearance such a priority. And set the precedent you don't talk about their physical appearance or statistics with anybody but their medical provider. This doesn't mean we can't empower them to think positively about themselves. We want our children to celebrate their body for what it does and what it looks like, and want to empower and support them in doing so. The subtle difference is celebrating how they feel rather than imposing how we feel. For example, instead of saying, "I'm so proud of you," which projects our expectations and standards onto them, we can say, "I bet you feel really proud," or "It sounds like you're really proud of yourself for doing X." If they get a haircut or try out a new style, let's say, ask them how they feel about it rather than telling them about how you feel. Celebrate how it impacts them rather than focusing on your visual reaction. Now, in line with all of this, we need to hold each other accountable, and in our families as well. So we have a rule in our home that we don't make self-deprecating comments under any circumstances. This is true for anyone who enters our home space as well, and we've committed to holding each other accountable. If anyone says anything negative about themselves, their appearance, actions, feelings, we call out the negative comment and invite them to say something positive about themselves. We always offer support and share kind things with them if they're having a hard time and try to make it an experience of celebration rather than shame. However you and your family choose to handle it, commit to banning self-deprecating and judgmental talk. This doesn't mean we don't get to feel disappointed or upset about something and name that. It means that we don't label ourselves negatively in response to how we feel, what we did, or what happened. Now, another switch we need to make is this shifting of what our job is and isn't. Your job is not to prevent bad things from happening to your kids, but to give them skills and support for when it does. I wish we could prevent our kids from experiencing the same pain and distress we did, but even if the specifics are different, your kids will feel distress around their body. They'll feel judged, they'll question their appearance, they may even struggle with food. Unfortunately, this is normal, reasonable, and expected. We can't prevent it, but we can normalize it and give them tools to respond when they do feel this way. Now, a major way you can do this is by talking about your own experiences and asking about theirs. Social media is also a major source of information for kids, and they're getting messages constantly about what they should look like, act like, be like, etc. Don't shame them for this or take the tools away. Empower them to think about the effect this has on them and support them in finding ways to engage differently with these platforms. Make it normal to have a bad body image day and help them separate feelings from actions. Can you validate how they feel and help them see that this doesn't mean they have to diet or change who they are to be loved or worthy? This requires us to ask hard questions and talk about the scary stuff. We have to get comfortable talking about the isms in our culture that perpetuate beliefs that some people and bodies are better than others. We need to talk about diet and fitness culture. We need to be open to the idea that we may be getting it wrong because we're constantly learning what is best about our kids. We have to be comfortable talking about fat phobia and the internalized biases we all have as it relates to body size. We have to be okay not fixing everything for our kids or unintentionally making their pain our story. Remember, our job is to equip them with confidence and skills, and a big part of this is knowing what is and is out of our control. And the last principle I'll say is it's time to forgive yourself. Sometimes when we think about these ideas, we get lost in a sea of shame, calling out all the ways we may have unintentionally perpetuated negative body image and diet culture. Let it go. It doesn't serve you or your kids to beat yourself up about that. As my 2-year-old says every time we reach a tough spot or move through a difficult emotion, we're just learning. You're not supposed to get it right every time. You're supposed to be open to learning as you go. You are doing the best you can every day with the information and resources at your disposal. Celebrate that. And if you learn something new from this video or as you go through this process, celebrate it. Be excited about the expansion rather than judging yourself with this new information. So as we close, I want to invite every one of you to comment below with one idea, one tip, one strategy that you're taking with you to put into practice as you think about how you want to support your kids and the children around you. What's something you can commit to? And maybe it's even what's one thing you're going to let go of. Maybe a shame thought or a judgment you've given against yourself that you're going to give yourself permission to leave here so that you can show up in that learner mindset. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to subscribe so that rather than having to come back here and check for new content all the time, you can get an alert every time I publish a new video. And if you want to stay in the know on everything else I do in Adversity Rising, you'll find a link in the show notes to get onto my email list where you'll get exclusive content that I don't share anywhere else. Thank you so much for seeing this video with me and being here in this vulnerable space. We are all trying to parent our kids again to be the best versions of themselves that they can be and give them an opportunity to not feel the pain we did or experience suffering. And that's hard. Parenting is quite literally the hardest job I've ever had to endure. So let's think about how we can take the pen back by watching these videos, by being open to change and growing, so that not only can our children thrive, but we can too. I'll see you in the next video.